What if I told you that autism is not lifelong for everybody? What if I told you that some children don't just improve, but actually lose their diagnosis? Today, you're going to hear from a mom, a scientist, and a researcher who refused to accept nothing can be done. And what she discovered will completely change how you think about autism. Hello, and welcome to School to Homeschool. I am Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 6, and a former middle school teacher turned homeschool mom. I have kids in their 20s all the way down to elementary age and everything in between. Are you thinking about pulling your kids from the school system like I did, but you're scared to death and don't know what to do next? My friends, I felt the same way, and you have come to the right place. I want to help your family leave the system so that you can take the hearts and minds of your children back. Dr. Theresa Lyons is an international autism educator, an Ivy League scientist, and an autism parent. She's the founder and CEO of Navigating AWEtism, a groundbreaking platform that transforms the overwhelming complexity of autism science into clear, actionable steps for families. With a Ph.D. from Yale and a deeply personal mission, Dr. Lyons has worked with parents in over 21 countries, bringing evidence-based strategies that change lives. Today, she'll share how her unique blend of rigorous science and real-world experience is giving parents what they've never had before: clarity, confidence, and a roadmap for progress. Dr. Lyons, thank you so much for meeting with me today and talking with these wonderful parents about your work in autism. And so let's just jump right in. First of all, what made you decide? Let's rewind and start at the beginning. With your own educational journey and what led you into studying about autism and then your research that you did.
Definitely. So the whole reason I'm involved in autism is my daughter. Very simply, my daughter. It became very personal. So just to rewind, like you're saying, I have my PhD in computational chemistry from Yale University. I'm a chemist. I love chemistry. I loved chemistry ever since I was a little child. So I would go downstairs in the basement and mix my mom's chemicals together and make all these terrible smells and
Awesome.
get in trouble, but be curious. And so I loved chemistry. And so I went on. I got a bachelor's of science in chemistry, master's in organic chemistry. So that's in the lab, mixing and everything. Then I went on to Yale to get another master's in, this was general chemistry, and then my PhD is computational chemistry. So that's at the interface of obviously chemistry, biology, math, computer science, physics.
Wow.
It was really just a tough challenge.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, it definitely was a challenge. But I enjoy challenges. So that's what computational chemistry is. So basically, we studied chemistry and in particular structure-based drug design. So you have proteins and you have molecules, and you're studying this all on the computers. So you're trying to understand the interactions.
Gotcha. Okay, so then, now, how old is your daughter now?
My daughter is just about 16 now.
Okay, so were you in school when you had your daughter? Like, where were you in your educational path when you had her?
Sure. So I had her. So after my PhD, I went and did a postdoc at Sanofi Aventis. So I was working in the pharmaceutical industry.
Nice.
And then I worked for a medical consulting strategy. So I was a medical strategist for different pharmaceutical companies. And then I switched to nonprofits, and that's when I had my daughter. So I had worked for a few years. And I was still in the healthcare space, but in the nonprofit space.
Gotcha. Okay, so you have your daughter, and at what point was your daughter diagnosed, and that you started noticing things going on with your daughter?
Well, those are definitely two different answers.
Okay, yeah. So let's start with the first one and then go to the second one.
Yes, because I mean, this is the important thing to understand about autism. You have the concerns, and then you might have red flags from doctors, and then it takes time to get a diagnosis. So the first kind of like official sign was when her pediatrician at about it was 8 or 9 months, said, I have some concerns that we're going to have some problems with development, so I want to keep a really close eye on her. And there wasn't anything drastic at that time. It was just there wasn't as much kind of like cooing back and forth, that kind
Gotcha.
of thing. So a lot of times the earliest signs of autism, and we're talking early, right? Like 8 months, 9 months,
Hmm.
is really a difference in that attention and that back and forth. So, like
Interesting.
behavior is something that many people are familiar with autism, but you're not going to see those typical behaviors in someone who's so young. And nowadays, a reliable autism diagnosis can be made at 18 months. That's the
Wow.
earliest. Yeah, so it's important to really understand these early signs, and I'm talking real early signs.
Gotcha. So, what are some of the early signs for parents that might be concerned? Like, is what's going on with my child? And I ask that because I have 6 children, and when I had my youngest child, I noticed that things were different with her than my other kids, and I kept going back to the pediatrician saying, I'm really concerned. Now she wasn't diagnosed as autistic. She was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, and I went back and again, but I had other children as a reference, to go,
Right.
wait a minute. Developmentally, some things are not the same as the others, and she was responding these ways versus the other kids. For a parent who might be their first child and they have no idea, right? Because we don't know what we're
That was
doing
me.
when we start. Yeah, none of us. We're all like, oh, now I have a child, and I'm supposed to know what to do. What are some things that they can look for?
Well, that is one of the really early signs of a parent starting to notice things. They don't notice autism, but they notice, things are just a little bit harder than either it was with my other child or than it is with some of my friends' kids.
Okay.
Like they might interact just so much easier with other kids, and then with their own child, it just feels like different. And so a lot of times that is that there's something that just is not right. And that's our intuition many
Hmm.
times that are giving us that warning sign. But a lot of times the absolute beginning is things feel a little bit different.
Interesting. Okay.
So it might be connection is harder to make with your baby. And it might not just be one symptom, right? Because especially if we're talking, an 8-month-old or a 1 year old, something like that, it's really like a pattern. So it might not be as clear cut as, okay, they're not talking, right? So not talking, huge red flag for autism. Um, but it really is this pattern of social attention, communication, and then sensory processing certainly is important. So, are they getting overwhelmed with lights or noise or things like that? Autism is this combination of so many different things. And the other thing to think about also is that autism does not look the same. So the symptoms are
Interesting.
not the same for every child. So that's the other thing that certainly gets complex. So you really just want to be mindful of differences in attention
Okay.
when you're thinking about a child very early in their life if autism is an issue.
Okay. So back to your story, you noticed these things about your daughter, and then what happened?
Well, as a person who works in the pharmaceutical industry, right? This is what I knew. I knew healthcare. I did not know autism. I had never worked in the autism space, but I worked for pharmaceutical companies, so I knew how to put together, a top-notch healthcare team. I understand how information is taught two doctors, right? So it was about finding the top doctors who are on the cutting edge of the research so that I wasn't waiting 30 years
Yes.
for research to kind of trickle down into mainstream. So I really wanted to get a jump on everything as much as I could. So really assembling a team. And then the way autism is diagnosed is it's based on observation. So autism is not a single, let's say, biological condition. It's a developmental outcome. So that's what the diagnosis is made on. I wish there was a test, a blood test, a urine
Yeah.
test, MRI. None of that is available to get an autism diagnosis. And again, that's because the autism itself is so varied.
Yeah.
So what we did was we went and we eliminated pretty much anything else it could be that had a test. So we did that, all those different tests. And then it was like, okay, there's nothing else that can explain this. And it was pretty obvious at that point. So my daughter was diagnosed when she was 3.5.
Wow. How did that affect, like, because did you public school or homeschool your daughter?
At that time, so she was 3.5. She was still home
At
with
home.
us.
Okay. Okay. And then as you navigated going into the school system, what did that look like for your family and for her?
Oh my goodness, we've done everything. So we've done public school, we've done private school, we've done homeschool. Um, and all of them are great, and all of them have aspects to it that at certain times in my daughter's life just weren't ideal for her. I really do enjoy homeschooling. I think it is. I think it's great to really be able to teach, but I'm a teacher. I like, in
You
grad
enjoy
school,
that.
yeah, I do enjoy that. So yeah, the schooling aspect, it's important to understand that it doesn't have to be one thing for all of the child's life with autism. That it's really important to understand, how is this child learning? Sometimes parents homeschool kids with autism in the beginning part when they're getting very serious about diet and they have different supplements and prescriptions and there's just a lot going on. And sometimes when kids go to school, they eat food they shouldn't. And if a child has allergic reactions or things like that, there can really be setbacks. So there's definitely a lot of things to consider when deciding about schooling for a child with autism.
And so, and where did your daughter, where is she now? Where did she end up? Is she in public school? Is she homeschooled? What does it
Right
look
now
like?
she's in public school.
Is she, okay.
Yeah, because she wanted to.
Yeah.
That was her dream, and she's like, I want to go to public high school, and she knew exactly where and what, and
You're like,
so
okay, I will
that
honor
was
that. Yeah.
yes, exactly, yeah, and it's important. I mean, the whole idea of raising a child is for them to come
Right.
up with that independence and for their own ideas as to what they want to do, and then to understand that work goes with it, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, it's definitely great to see her have dreams and then be able to do the work to make them come true.
I love that. Okay. So your daughter ultimately is what has informed starting navigating autism. And for those listening, it's AWETISM. Is the your website and your business. So
Yes.
let's talk about navigating autism and what you do exactly, and what led you to getting in there. So we'll start with, how did you what led you to starting this?
Sure. So when my daughter was diagnosed, I asked the doctor right there, that appointment, okay, so now what? What do we do? What's the plan, right? I'm a strategist in the pharmaceutical industry, right?
Yeah.
So I understand how to think big picture. I understand how to think standard of care, options, what like I'm ready for a whole chessboard to be laid out in front of me and be like, all right, these are the moves. And there's not anything like that whatsoever with autism. And it was so unsatisfying. It was, well, things are probably just going to get worse. They typically don't get better. There's not really much you can do, right? Because the diagnosis is based on an observation. So
Right.
where are you supposed to put your scientific focus? Who knows, right?
Right. You're
Um,
guessing. Yeah.
exactly, right? So it's like, okay, you can do some physical therapy to, maybe strengthen the body, and you could do some OT to help with, fine motor issues, right? So there's physical therapy and occupational therapy and speech therapy. Okay, so we'll just sit there and we'll repeat the word over and over again, and eventually your daughter will say it, right? Like, so there's a lot of things about autism that don't make sense when you don't involve science and logic. So I stopped working and I wanted to understand what is autism. So I went to the scientific literature, right? This is what I do. This is my training from academia and also business. So I went to PubMed, which is where all the high quality journals are kept with the scientific studies. And I started trying to understand on a molecular level, what is autism? What is going on in my daughter's body? Where can we put focus so we would actually see change, right? There's so many issues. She wants to talk. Why can't she talk? Right?
Yeah.
She wants to write. Why can't she write? What are all these limitations on the body? So really understanding that. So as I started to study the science, things with my daughter started to improve as we did different things. And then it was the doctors, these specialists who saw things change with my daughter, who really encouraged me to teach other parents. Because again, I was teaching from quality science, and that's how Navigating Autism got started. It was really just my determination that parents should have quality information, because there's so much nonsense going on and social media wasn't even really a thing back then. You had
Yeah.
Facebook, but we
But
didn't have all the TikTok and all this other stuff. It's really easy to make bad decisions based on bad information in autism. So that was really the reason why I started my YouTube channel over 10 years ago, was so that there was a video encyclopedia of scientific journal articles being taught to parents. So I would pick one journal article and I would do a video on it so that parents could understand the information and then say, okay, does this apply to my child? So it wasn't a video to tell parents, you need to do this, right? It was, this is important information. This is the reason why. This is what it would apply to. Now you think, does that resonate with your child?
I love that. What were some of the things that you found that you did with your daughter that worked, that the doctors are like, wait a minute, could you share that with other parents, please? What were some of those tactics, like some of the tactical things that you did?
Well, so the first thing to really start with is the fact that autism is not lifelong for everybody. And that's
Interesting.
really where I started, right? So there's scientific literature all throughout the decades, small publications here and there, showing that an autism diagnosis is not lifelong. So when my daughter was
Interesting.
diagnosed, it was about 10% of kids diagnosed with autism lost their diagnosis, meaning, right, there was no observable difference between them and someone who never had an autism diagnosis. So they didn't need OT and PT and speech and all different supports in school. Um, and that was really important because it got me thinking, wait a second, we have two trajectories here in life,
Yeah.
right? This
Yeah.
is really important because at one side, you go on and she can do anything she wants in life. And on the other side, she's extremely limited. And that's not the way she wants to live her life. So that is really that first key piece of information that parents need to know, and they need to know it's scientific. So back then that was called an optimal outcome. And then just recently, another publication was done, and this was on a little over 200 kids in Boston. So high quality research. And they found that 37% of kids diagnosed with autism lost their autism diagnosis within a few years.
Wow.
So they
Wow.
followed them. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. So this percentage is much greater. And it's important for parents to really hear that and understand, wait a second, things don't have to get worse necessarily. They don't have to be lifelong, right? And so as a parent, then you start to make very different decisions when you have quality information.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I have never heard that before. But then I don't have any kids that have autism, and what I hear is just stuff from Instagram or TikTok or
Right.
wherever because it comes down your feed and you're like, oh, that's interesting. But I assumed that it was lifelong. Like that's what I assumed just as a layperson who doesn't know anything about it. And so I think that's really fascinating that it's not for everybody, which is that's what they told us with my daughter's sensory processing disorders. They said she may grow out of this, not
Well,
necessarily.
yeah.
And so, and I was
It's
like,
not.
and I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good news. And they said, and she may not, and I'm like, but at least for me, it was like, okay, so at least I've got a couple different options. Like there, as you mentioned, there's might be a couple different paths, depending on what happens in the future, you
Right.
know.
And so, like, what a parent has as an expectation for their child dictates what they do. If you're told nothing can change, what are you going to try?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Like, what's the
No, that's
point?
it. Yeah.
Right. So your child's future is set in that trajectory based on bad information.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're told autism is not lifelong for everybody, and you can look at the different research, then you can start to say, okay,
Oh,
right? Well, the
yeah.
next question is, well, what did those parents do?
Yeah.
Right?
So then
So
what? Yeah.
exactly, right? You lean in very differently. You now have different expectations. Like, whoa, wait a second, what's possible for my child? You're not listening to someone tell you that's the limit. Your child's never going to do anything differently. So this is the important starting point for anyone with autism. And it's not, I know the phrase of, oh, they've just grown out of it. Or sometimes people say, oh, well, they've just learned to mask. No,
Hmm.
that's not what the science is showing. So growing out of it, I have never heard a parent who has done all the different work say, "Oh yeah, they just grew out of it."
Yeah, it's good now. I
I
know for
know.
us, I mean, we went through, all months and months and months of OT and all of these different things. And I still see things and I'm like, oh, okay. So she's about to have a meltdown. I better intervene here and help her regulate, So, uh,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
so
It's not just growing out of. So I don't want any parent listening to this to think, okay, well, I'll just not do anything, and eventually, maybe, hopefully, they'll grow out of it. No, what really makes the difference is getting very specific
hmm,
with your child's health. So really
yeah.
understanding what is optimal health. Do they have, how is their digestion? What
Hmm,
are they eating, right? So there's some really basic things, hydration, right? Things like that. Vitamin D. Now you start to get into areas of health where you can test for different things, right? So all of these decisions, a parent will start to ask and make if they understand,
hmm.
oh, we could have an entirely different life if we really focus on certain things. So it's important to focus on health.
So for a lot of parents, does it become then like trial and error trying to figure out like okay this whether it's I'm just throwing this out there because I really don't know, but like oh maybe they have too much sugar, or maybe there's gluten problems, or maybe there's red dye. Is that the kind of thing that you look at, or they're not getting enough water, they're not getting enough sunlight, they're not getting enough exercise? Is that what you're talking
That's what
about?
I'm talking about. Yeah, but so many parents do that trial by error kind of
Hmm.
thing. It's not something I would recommend, right? That's not very
Okay.
strategic. That's not very
Yeah,
logical.
it just feels like spaghetti on the wall. Like, please let it
Exactly.
stick. Let it
Yeah,
stick.
it's gonna be exhausting. It's definitely not the way to go. So you want to be very methodical, and this is what I've learned. So I've worked with parents in over 21 different countries. So as I started, breaking down the science, parents reached out to me and wanted to work with me, and I had different doctors recommend me as well.
Hmm.
And it really became, okay, how can we make sure that nothing is missed,
Hmm.
right? And
Oh,
there's so
nice.
many things that have to be covered, right? So yeah, like you mentioned, diet, super important, right? Doctors, super important. You're going to need more than one
Hmm.
for sure, right? You have different supplements and prescriptions.
Hmm.
You have educational approaches. Those are super important as well. You have the parents' mindset, right? You're in crisis mode more than likely. How are you going to manage this plus all the other responsibilities you likely have in life? So there's so much going on, and then how do you stay positive or determined or motivated throughout this whole process? There's also probiotics, right? So gut health is super important. And then celebrating success. So when you're in this huge journey like this and in crisis mode, you have to celebrate these small things in which many other parents might not even celebrate. They might not ever celebrate their child really like looking at them in the eye, right? Because a lot of times that's what babies are doing. But that might be something that was never really experienced when their child was a baby, right? Going back to what are some of those earlier signs of autism in babies. That's certainly one of them. So that becomes a huge thing to celebrate, and it's really important to celebrate that. So there needs to be all these celebration of milestones along the way, and many times other people don't really appreciate what it took to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does a parent then go about moving forward if they're not going to throw spaghetti at the wall?
Yeah.
What do they do first and second, and like what's the
Well,
order?
what I have learned with working with so many parents one-on-one is that you can't really tell them what to do first.
That's
Right?
fair.
Like
That's
what
fair. That's
I
fair.
think is going to work and would be the best thing to do might not be what they want to do, right? So
Gotcha.
this is where it really comes into understanding, okay, what are my options? What do I think I'll be successful in? So this is what I learned, and this is why I created something called the Navigating Autism Matrix. So there are those 7 categories, right?
Okay.
And so present them with the parents and say, okay, where do you want to focus first? Where do you think you're like, yes, I want to do that? Keep in mind that this is all difficult and no parent is really wanting to
To
have to
do it.
have all the
Right.
extra work, right? But it's like, all right, since we have to start somewhere, where would you like to start? So some parents are like, all right, let's start with diet. Some parents are like, absolutely not. I do not want to touch diet. Let's start with finding a doctor. Okay, so we go that way, right? So other parents are like, you know what? Let's start with some supplements. Okay, let's get some of the basics going. So once you get a parent to get started, right, and you use science, scientific publications, you use a lot of logic so that they're not guessing. The worst thing to do is to try something and not work,
Yeah.
especially at the early stage in the game, right? You want to
Right.
do something and you want to see a change, and then you want to say, "Ooh, what's next? What else can I do?" And that's how you want to use science. So there's lab testing for so many different aspects of health, right? Even diet related. So it's really using lab testing, using science to ground the parent in, oh, there actually is something that is, wrong with my child in the sense of health, right? So
Yeah.
vitamin D. Let's say if you're not giving them any vitamin D supplementation, more than likely their number is going to be around 20. Where for functional medicine, optimal health is 60, right? So, oh, there's a problem there. There's an issue. There's something wrong. My child does not have enough vitamin D. What is vitamin D necessary for? Oh, just about everything in the body, right? So, not a good place to start if you don't have enough vitamin D, right? So, sometimes when parents start to get vitamin D up to those optimal levels, they might see changes in sleep. You have a child who wasn't sleeping before, and all of a sudden they start to get tired and they're like, I'm gonna go to sleep. That's a huge change,
Yeah.
right? So
That's a
you start to
huge
see
change.
benefits. Sometimes kids start to get sick less. Oh, because vitamin D is important for their immune system. Okay, excellent, right? So when you can use different tests, different healthcare related tests to understand what are these healthcare issues that might be causing a problem in my child's body, and you resolve them, then it gets easier to take those next steps.
Well, and I think that having those wins, as you mentioned earlier, for me as a mom would be a big deal. And
Yes.
because, well, and even starting and going, okay, and I love how you like present the options and are like, here, which one do you want to do? Like, because for me as mom, I'd be like, what's the easiest one that doesn't
Exactly.
involve my life completely shifting, like food would, and
Exactly.
suddenly we have to cut out, nightshades and gluten, and something as simple as vitamin D. Like for me, it would be like, oh, that's an
Right.
easy change. I could do that. Like,
Right.
you know,
Yep.
and then celebrating those, which as a mom, I'd be like, oh my gosh, they slept. You
Right.
don't understand.
Exactly.
This is a big deal. So I love that. And so with navigating autism, is that what you help people with that plan? Is that correct?
Yeah, so I have a company now. We have health coaches that work on the platform,
Mm-hmm.
and we start parents off with the Navigating Autism Matrix, and we walk them through the science that is important. There are
Mm-hmm.
different levels, right? So you can't do everything all at once. That's one
Right.
thing parents really try. They're like, okay, let's just try everything, right? So I'll make some diet changes, and I'll add in some supplements, and I'll do this, and I'll do that, and I'll start ABA, and then it becomes like a mess. You have no idea what happened. Things might have gotten worse. They might have gotten a little better, not enough, and the parent is exhausted and everything.
Yeah.
So after working with so many parents one on one, that's when I was able to say, all right, we need to be able to have consistent information that parents can progress through.
Mm-hmm.
They can do different tests so they can quantify what the changes in their child, and then continue that intense focus on things that can be measurable rather than just, okay, I don't know, things got a little better. No, I don't know. It's really about quantifying it. So we have health coaches that really help with that mindset.
Hmm.
Right. So this is many times parents are in crisis mode. I certainly was
Yeah.
for like years. Right. And so it's important to be able to transition out of that crisis mode and to work with a health coach that
Mm.
understands it. And we have small groups so that parents can experience this with other parents and they don't feel so isolated and alone. Because this is a very different parenting journey and experience
Mm-hmm.
than what most other parents are experiencing.
Wow. So let's talk about ABA for a little bit. When we talked a couple months ago, um, you had mentioned ABA, and I've heard the term ABA, but again, like I have no background in it. Like I have no knowledge of it.
Right.
What is it, and how is it used?
All right. So ABA is Applied Behavioral Analysis. So that's what the
Okay.
ABA stands for. And insurance in the US does not pay for many things relating to autism. It's very
Okay.
unfortunate and it's very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
One of those things that it pays for is applied behavioral analysis. And so, what that is you teach a child through repetition, through external rewards. That's applied behavioral analysis. So, let's say you want to teach a child colors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have red and blue, and you have different blocks, red and a blue block in front of the child. You sit them down at a desk in a chair, and you have one other person, an adult, working with them. So it's very intense. And you say to the child, okay, point to red. And maybe they're not even paying attention. They're looking off to the. So then the technician would maybe take their hand and do what's called hand over hand and point to the red. And then they would take their hand away and say, okay, point to red. And again, maybe the child looks like they're not paying attention, right? And so then again, that technician would take the hand and say, all right, this is red. And so let's just say after a few times, the child points to the red on their own.
Mm-hmm.
As a reward, they would get maybe an M&M or a cookie
Mm-hmm.
or iPad time or something along those lines. So it's extrinsic, the reward. So they're trying to change the behavior
Mm-hmm.
to
And
teach colors and to teach pointing based upon external rewards. So that is ABA, and it's very controversial because many people do not like it,
I was gonna
right?
say, so for me, when you're describing it, I'm like, it kind of sounds like Pavlov's dogs, like you
Yes,
get the bell
yes,
rings, you get the food, like, and okay, you did it and you got the reward.
right.
Is that, I
Yeah,
mean, essentially,
yes. And so the recommendation is that a child with autism receive 40 hours of this a week.
So here is a question for you. Um, is it possible for children with autism, especially in the extreme cases of autism? I don't know another way to describe
Profound.
that.
Yep.
Profound. Thank
Profound.
you for the profound. Is it possible for there to be any intrinsic motivation to do things, or to,
Yes.
or
Oh,
to,
great question.
or to like awaken that within their hearts and their souls?
Many times their heart and soul is gloriously awake. They are just failed by a body that does not respond and do what it wants.
Okay.
Right? So, in that whole example, where is the displaying of intelligence? In the motor control, in the actual pointing. So, the assumption was that the child with autism had complete motor control. And motor control is technically an issue relating to the autism diagnosis, right? So, this is where it gets very, very difficult. So, a child with profound autism who might be rocking and maybe moaning, or they might have different vocal stems, they might look like they are not paying attention whatsoever, but there's a large brain body disconnect. So their body is doing one thing and their brain is doing another, and most times their brain is sitting there listening to you teach them. And it's only once kids are able to communicate, especially in this profound area of autism, that just parents' minds are blown as to how much their child had been learning all along. And this is really that cutting edge aspect of autism. So doctors are really trying to understand more and more apraxia and dyspraxia and how that relates to an autism diagnosis. Because many times kids with autism also have either apraxia, which means they have very difficult time controlling the motor relating to speech, or dyspraxia, which means someone has very difficult controlling the motor of their entire body, right? So that would explain the whole, oh, I was not able to point. I couldn't get my body to be focused and
Yeah.
to be attentive and to point exactly at what I want. Sometimes kids will go to point and you'll see their finger just like whoop, kind of drift
Yeah.
away.
Like
And it's
the body. Yeah.
yeah, that's the body, that's not the intellect. So it's really important to be able to see a difference between the two. So actually, on my YouTube channel, I interviewed different kids with profound autism who use a technique of communication called spelling to communicate. So what it is, it's a letter board, and there's many different stages to learn. Um, but they're using gross motor skills to spell out words. And so that's what allows them to communicate and to show that they actually have intelligence. So you can see videos on my YouTube channel of kid that might be totally yapping, and there's a teacher there reading like poetry, or some ninth, 10th grade level material, and it looks like the child's not paying attention. But then when they're able to focus their body, they can spell out different things, and you would see that their soul is alive and
Yeah.
they love learning. It was just that they didn't have a way to communicate.
Yeah.
So it's really important to have this understanding of profound autism.
Wow. So
Yes, it's
then, like, to
amazing.
me, like I'm sitting here and I'm kind of getting teary eyed, going, because because I think about if I was that child and my body didn't cooperate the way that I wanted it to, but I had all of these thoughts and feelings inside, and I wanted to express them, and I couldn't. Like
Yeah.
that's what I just kept thinking. Like, oh, that must
For
be so
years.
frustrating.
For years. Just think, you couldn't tell anyone that your favorite food was blueberry, because maybe when you saw a strawberry, your body got excited because your body likes red, but you actually like blueberries,
Yeah.
right? Maybe you never were able to tell someone you like documentaries. Maybe you were never able to say I'm sorry for anything you might have done. There's so much that gets trapped when someone has autism and difficulty with communication. Even kids with autism who have speech, they might not have that ebb and the flow of the conversation of speech. So they can't really express their true inner thoughts as well. They might be very strong academically or even repeating certain things. So there's so much about autism that just gets trapped inside a body that is not doing what the person wants it to do.
Wow. And maybe you can't answer this question. Maybe you can. I don't know. How do we better help these kids be able to unleash what's inside?
Really, that first step is understanding their health.
Okay. So it
So
goes back to the
understand.
matrix.
It goes back to the matrix and to the science, because yes, the autism diagnosis is made based on observation. Correct. 100%. That has not changed, right? But there's so much about health that we can test for, that we can understand. Okay, the immune system. Why is the immune system, let's say, overactive for a child who is maybe never gets sick, or underactive for a child who's always gets sick? Or what happens when a child gets sick and then all of a sudden all of these behaviors spike up, right? That's related to inflammation, right? So there's all of these things regarding health that really make a difference on how our bodies move through life. And for a child with autism, it's really important to do different tests, to have that understanding of all these different aspects, and to really focus on health and how does this child get optimal health. There's different risk factors, right? And the science is very direct in risk factors. It's not causation, right? But there's different risk factors. So things like air pollution, environmental pollution, right? So there are all these different things. Food allergies cause issues, right? So some kids are eating tomatoes and it causes problems with sleep, right? But it's like, if you don't really understand how health can really impact behavior, you just really end up never trying.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if so my husband has Hashimoto's. I'm putting it out there. That's not a secret. But that was one thing, is like he didn't know until adulthood that tomatoes cause all these problems for him. Had no idea. No idea.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting how connected like the environment and our bodies are to food, to our water, to vitamin D and the sun. I think it's fascinating. It has with the like with gut health and with dietary health and things like that. Is this recent, or has it been, have we known for quite a while that it could have it could affect a child's everything with autism with a child? Like, how are we just learning? That's my question. Does that make sense?
Um, well, I think to answer that question, it would go back to the research from that showed around 10% of kids with autism lost their diagnosis. That I would say is a point in time, so it was 2010, where there was enough information known among parents and among the cutting edge doctors who really understood and saw things change, right? So these are doctors that are really driving the research, driving what is going on. So I would say since 2010, there's
Wow.
really been that undercurrent of there's something that can really impact autism. Like cerebral folate deficiency is something that
Interesting.
has become very popular right now, since RFK Jr. and President Trump had that news conference talking about it. And, some of the first clinical trials was done before 2010. So a
Interesting.
lot of doctors knew about cerebral folate deficiency, and they knew about the blood test to do to see if that happens. And it turns out 70% of kids with autism do have these
Interesting.
antibodies that block folate in the brain. So there are all these aspects to health that are so important to look at. And the science has been around for quite a while. Now, the controversy, let me just preface that with okay, then, why doesn't everyone embrace cerebral folate deficiency? So there have been 5 clinical trials that have been done throughout the world on cerebral folate deficiency and autism and the impact of speech. Each of those clinical trials had less than 100 patients in it.
Okay.
So normally the way science progresses is you've done those 5 clinical trials, And now it's time to go to larger clinical trials. So maybe you have 1,000 patients in each of those clinical trials. And so a lot of pushback now is saying, well, RFK and President Trump said that, this is something worthy, but it's not fully evidence-based. And it's not as if there isn't evidence, but leucovorin, which is what they were discussing, is prescription vitamin B9, right? So the downside, the potential risks are very minimal towards this. And so more than likely they felt, it's really important to get this information out there and not to wait another decade or so. The other thing is leucovorin is prescription. So there's no pharmaceutical company who's out there putting together these large, expensive clinical trials. So it's doctors getting, research funding and putting together funding in a variety of other different ways. So a lot of things about autism is very different, and it's important to have that understanding behind it as to, okay, why are things progressing in a certain way? So the science has been there for quite a while, for sure. It's just becoming now more well known.
Interesting. Well, and would you say that we're still scratching the surface to some degree?
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. Yes. Like, we have a good understanding, right? So there's lots of different tests to do so that you can have strategic focus. But there's still certain aspects that are really unknown, like epilepsy with, co-occurring with autism. That is something that happens quite often. And there sometimes cerebral folate deficiency does cause the epilepsy, but not always. So, there's so much about neuroscience that everyone is still learning.
Yeah.
But it's so different than, just being told, oh, there's nothing you can do. That's really bad advice.
Right. Good luck to you. Here's a lollipop.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Have a
right?
good life.
All right, let me get the next. You're diagnosed too, right? So that's not. I really and the sad part is I still talk to parents currently, presently in 2026, where they're told the same thing that I was told all those years ago. Yeah.
Oh.
So that is a real problem. And that's part of the mission that I'm here, is to talk about the quality science and to teach parents, okay, how do I understand the science and if it applies to my child? Because you can't do everything, because everything doesn't apply to your child. And you can't do exactly what another parent did, because autism is so varied. You have profound autism. Not everybody has profound autism. So it is really individualized. And so parents really just need to think how to apply certain things to their child, if they apply.
Gotcha. What's something that you wish I would have asked you that I haven't asked you yet?
You asked a really good question about profound autism. I love that question. That was a great question. Let's see. Maybe since ABA does not sound fun.
No, it does not. Now that I know what it is.
What other options are there?
I love that. Yeah. What are the other options? And are there any intrinsic ones?
Yes. Okay. So most definitely, there are researchers on the West Coast right now. They're at Stanford University, and they have created what is called ABA 2.0. So they call it pivotal response treatment. And so this is, I love this approach. And there's many different approaches that have sound science behind them as to being able to educate kids with autism. So PRT, which is the pivotal response treatment, that teaches motivation and education, but in an intrinsic way. So I'll just give you a little example.
Yes, please.
So a child wants to go outside, right? It's cold out. You need a jacket. That's how you can start to teach putting the jacket on, the different motor related to that. because they want to get outside, right?
Right.
So maybe you're outside, right? You can then say, all right, they like the swing. Okay, awesome. You want to get on the swing? Yeah, you get on the swing, right? And then what are you going to do? The adult is always going to push them, right? So you stand in front of them, you bring the swing up, and you wait. You hold it. You have that pause. And they look at you. And maybe if the child is profoundly autistic, maybe that's good enough.
Yeah,
And
that's a
what
big deal. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. That might be just amazing, right? So they look at you and you're like, wee, right? And you let them go, right? Because now they're leaning into that socialization and using eye contact as communication, right? And they're rewarded with what they want, which is to be on the swing. And it feels fun, right?
Yeah.
So homeschooling, right? Like, how do I know all these different things, right? I homeschooled for different years. And so when I would homeschool, I always wanted to learn, how do I teach my daughter in an intrinsic way? How do I preserve that love of learning? Because it can easily be squashed out in so many different situations. So PRT is something that is really great in that it teaches the child through these intrinsic motivations. They teach children how to ask why, when, where, how, right? Like all these amazing questions, which other kids without an autism diagnosis normally does rapid fire all the time. But with autism, many times, not always, many times there is a deficit. And so being able to teach a child how to ask those questions it's just amazing, because then, one day your child will ask you, how was your day? And it's just like, oh, amazing. And so a lot of this can be accomplished through that intrinsic motivation. So PRT is definitely the place to start. Now, ABA is appropriate for like multiplication. Like there's certain things you just have to memorize in life, right? Yeah. Certainly. But you can't teach socialization by memorization.
Right.
That is something that can't be done. So you've got to be able to have these different choices. And this is what I was expecting to be told when I had that appointment when my daughter was diagnosed, right? Give me my options. What are my options? Give me the plan. There was none. So I went out and did the research and created it.
So you figured it out.
Yeah.
Now with PRT, can a parent do that, or does it take a therapist that knows how to do it to do it? Like, how does it work?
So a therapist obviously is always good to have on your team, right? Who would know how to do something like this. But there is a PRT, I think they call it the PRT Pocket Guide. It's one of my favorite books. It's a small, easily consumable book that teaches parents the concepts and gives some of these different exercises to do. But it's always great working with a therapist. So then you could give them specific situations and you could kind of brainstorm together and come up with that. I always find that moves things along much faster. But the idea then is for the parent to approach interactions using that kind of intrinsic motivation for their child. I mean, that's a great way to motivate your child for the rest of their life, right?
Right. Well, and I think
parenting in general.
I think not just parenting, but I worked in hiring for 20 years, and one of the problems that I saw small business owners deal with all the time is like, well, how do we get our employees motivated? Well, I'm like, you just came out of a system that, well, I didn't say that then because I didn't think about it and I didn't know about it. Now I look and think, oh, well, they were taught to be externally motivated. And yet the most power happens when internal motivation happens. So companies like Google and Facebook are like, oh, we should let them have some time to work on things they love. And then that's where brilliance happens. So I think it's a problem all around, not just with autism or with parents, but learning to like, how do we...
Well, ABA was originally founded for science and it wasn't discovered and formalized specifically for autism. They just kind of adapted it towards autism. But yeah, ABA, it's used in a variety of different situations, but extrinsic motivation, it doesn't work after a while. It just doesn't. It doesn't. It's not a good strategy. You just can't continue to bribe someone all throughout life. It just doesn't work.
It's true. But so the PRT Pocket Guide, is that an actual book that somebody can pick up from like
It's a book Amazon? You can just go on Amazon and type in, I think it's called Pocket Guide. Yeah.
I'll put a link in the show notes for those that want to pick that up
Okay.
or look at it. So, last thoughts. What advice would you give?
First, trust your intuition. If you're starting to recognize any early signs, or if you just feel like this is a lot more difficult than it seems it has to be, that's some of those real early signs. So it does take time to get a diagnosis. There are wait lists that are up to a year, even more. So if a parent has start to have those concerns, certainly get on those wait lists and really follow the intuition. It's certainly important.
I love that. Now, if people want to get a hold of you and find out more about navigating autism or utilize your services, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
Navigatingautism.com is our website. So if you want to sign up for the platform, it's $98 a month. We make it as affordable as possible. It is also flexible spending approved. So we have those as options. You can check me out on my YouTube channel.
What's
Like
the
I said, there's
name of your YouTube
Navigating
channel?
Autism.
Also the same. Okay. And that's Autism AWE. So at the
Yes,
beginning. So
AWE. Yes, yes, yes. It's important to have the right perspective when you're thinking about autism.
I love that. I love that. And I will, for those listening, I'm going to put all of her links in the show notes so that it's easy for you to get a hold of her. And so you don't have to try to remember, be like, stop the car. I have to pull over and write that down, right? It'll be in the show notes so you can find those easily. Dr. Lyons, thank you so much for taking the time today and coming and talking with me and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with these wonderful families. Mamas and papas, grandmas and grandpas, you are doing so much better than you think you are. You got this. We'll talk next week.
Thank you.